Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. With the exception of our president and maybe a few Fox News pundits, everybody is in agreement. Vladimir Putin interfered in the 2016 election in an effort to help Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. But why? And did the Trump campaign knowingly collude with the Putin regime? These are the questions we ask every day. And they're also explored in Jack Bryan's new documentary, Active Measures, featuring interviews with some of the biggest names in politics and an incredibly well-assembled look at exactly what happened, connecting all of the dots that we need connecting. Let's take a look.
President Trump. Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe?
Putin has worked to undermine democracies across the globe.
He made his way up through the KGB.
He learned how to maneuver politically.
The Russian mafia is an adjunct of the Russian government.
And they help maintain Mr. Putin's power.
To the point where Putin may well be the wealthiest man on the face of the planet.
How does Russia launder money into America?
Everything I know that's interesting, I can't tell you.
The Russians have a particular type of mark. They go after somebody who has business resources, shady morals, and political connections or aspirations. I've just described Donald Trump.
Putin realizes that if we're divided as a nation, we cannot protect ourselves from threats within and without.
And what you have is probably the biggest intelligence breach in the history of the world.
The crown jewel for any intelligence agency is to recruit an asset inside your adversary's intelligence agency.
They seem to have premonitions of things that were going to happen that in fact did happen.
The question is, who helped guide the decisions that the Russians were making?
Trump Tower was the money laundering paradise.
Anybody who was anybody in Russian organized crime bought a condo unit at Trump Tower.
We have a serious intelligence operation in the home of the man who becomes president of the United States. I think this is the tip of the iceberg.
What's at stake is truth and the cause of liberty at the most profound level possible.
Everybody, please welcome Director of Active Measures, Jack Bryan. So thanks so much for being here. Congratulations, connecting all of the dots that need connecting. What made you want to dive into this?
Yeah, so when we started this project late March 2017, what we noticed was that even at that point, there had been a lot of great reporting on the story, but people weren't really digesting it. It wasn't really coming together because it was a story here and a story there. And we felt that people needed one document, one film, one piece that they could sit down and absorb the 30-year history of what happened to really understand the origins and the whys, because if you don't have those, you can't really understand what's happening now.
We also live in such partisan times that as soon as one piece comes out, it's immediately muddled with misinformation by parties of one side of our politics here, that it's hard to remember specific information going into a new article that comes out later on.
Exactly. It's hard to build when you don't have a strong foundation. And what we try to do is really provide all the information so people have the tools to build that foundation for themselves.
So now in this documentary, you've got John Podesta, you've got Hillary Clinton, you've got John McCain, a few people who are not easy, I would imagine, to get on camera. So what was that process like, getting them involved to be interviewed?
Yeah, I mean, that was a multi-leg process. The first thing we did was we wanted to interview think tank people, and policy advisors and people that were really trusted within Washington. And what that sort of allowed us to do is to approach a lot of those politicians and say, look, this is bipartisan. We're not going to people that are just going to say the most extraordinary or outrageous things they can. We're going to really serious people to try to unwind exactly what happened. And when they saw who we were talking to, frequently we would meet with them. Like before we did the Hillary interview, we did the John Podesta interview, and after that he let her know that we weren't crazy, we weren't trying to do some wild conspiracy chase, but also that we knew where to look and we knew what we were talking about. And so once we got sort of the nod from people along the way, the people who were harder to get became more available.
Now, John McCain is really the only Republican person in office that you have as an interview subject in the film. Did you try for others? Were they generally not willing to be interviewed?
Well, there's really only 3 or 4 office holders in the film. So unfortunately, while a lot of the people don't necessarily have an R next to their name, a lot of the people who were think tank people or diplomats that we interviewed are Republicans. Of the 30 people we interviewed, about 14 or 13 of them are Republicans, and then some we don't know because we never asked them. And then some people were, heads of foreign heads of state who maybe they were a little bit more conservative, but it's kind of hard to cross, do that divide where if you're in Georgia, a liberal or conservative, what does that necessarily mean? There's a lot of subtleties and differences. But a large percentage were Republicans. We really focus on doing that because that was important to us.
Yeah, I guess my question wasn't in reference to the sort of partisanship of the number of people that were interviewed in the film. It's more the idea that the Republican makeup of our Congress and our Senate right now are those that are seemingly unwilling to actually tackle this subject. So I would imagine they're a bit harder to get on tape discussing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the Senate, I think that it's important as well to credit where credit's due, because some of these guys are dragging their feet and some of these guys are being complete obstructionists, and dragging your feet's a little bit better. So I would say that the Senate's better certainly than the House. In the House, it is very tough to get any of these guys to even, forget about talking to us, to want this issue to be talked about in any way. And then we have the biggest bully pulpit in the world, the presidency, trying to just clap down on the story. Absolutely, there's a lot of pressure on people to not. But I also think that a lot of that is, in a weird way, I think I'm hopeful about the fact that it's a cynical approach on their part. That once it's no longer politically expedient for them, it'll turn. I find it hard to believe that they genuinely believe it.
I feel like to be cynical on my end, they've gone so far down the rabbit hole at this point that when it becomes politically expedient for them, it'll just look too much like, it'll just look too hypocritical at that point.
I don't know. I mean, look at the Iraq War. I thought that was going to be the case, but now every elected official will tell you it probably wasn't worth doing. I think that for me, that was a test case of how amazingly quick people can transpose and shift positions. And really all that they would have to say is that it's a new piece of information that came out. Like if a new indictment came out, if that changed the political, whatever the thing is that is pushing the people to change their opinion, the politicians can jump on that and use that as an excuse.
Now I'm curious, Fox News is shown a couple times within the film, but I don't think at any point anybody talks about Fox News's role, both during the campaign and right now, in terms of providing misinformation, oftentimes information that seems as though it could come directly from the Kremlin, whether they know it or not. Was there an effort on your part to try to make the film feel consistently partisan, and referencing Fox News would then unfortunately make it feel partisan towards the left, or make the film bipartisan?
I feel you. No, it was more of a timing issue. The show. I mean, we definitely had references to Fox News. When a couple of references are still in there, specifically to Hannity.
See clips.
We see clips.
You see clips, but
yeah. And I think somebody mentions Hannity at one point, which I think that it was also we want to be specific with our targets. I think Hannity is a serious issue. I think when we were making it less so, but now Tucker Carlson is a serious issue. I think Shepard Smith though does really good reporting, and so I think that. We wanted to be really precise with our targeting. And I think that we probably erred a little bit more towards Alex Jones because we actually see him as being a state actor, whereas we kind of reference Fox News without really diving into it as much.
You see him as being a state actor?
Yeah, I think that Alex Jones has been funneling Russian propaganda since at least 2008, probably earlier than that. And the reason I think that it's intentional and overt is he does it on RT on issues that have nothing to do with his audience. I mean, we show a clip of him shilling for Putin for his invasion of Georgia, which his audience has no interest in that, and there's no reason he would take that position, which was in 2008 even exactly the Kremlin line, word for word, unless he was at least. And also, there's a lot of footage of him doing that, and. I would say that I would be very surprised if at the end of this we do not see Alex Jones, at least in part, as a state actor.
Now, some of the things that your interview subjects talk about are the Russians sowing disinformation or sowing division amongst Americans through the troll farm or the troll factory, and through articles that they put out, and political parties that they kind of, or political leaders that they kind of give money to, hold power to. But do you feel like America was sort of ripe for that kind of division to be sown, that it was already being sown here. And this is when I go back to Fox News. I feel like they've been sowing this kind of division, as well as the Republican Party has, by pushing culture war for so long, that division was ripe to be sown here.
I completely agree. I'd add two things to that as well. One is Citizens United, which made us completely ripe for foreign financial influence. And I would also say that on the other side, the Russian operation has been a slow creep. I mean, it didn't really turn a lot of heads when, I think it was 2000, maybe 2004, 2005, Tom DeLay received $1 million in cash through Jack Abramoff from Russian oligarchs. This has been a process that has been building and growing, and it's only now that we're starting to wake up to it. And
one of my favorite sort of things about the Trump presidency right now is that in order to cover their own ass and their absurd corruption scandals, they have to then drag everyone under the bus that's been operating under normal corruption scandals of both parties. Like just today I saw on CNN, Paris Denard was yelling at Phil Mudd about using his security clearance to be a to work for other companies afterwards, which is something that's just been happening in DC for decades now. But because the Trump team got caught actually doing it, or they're removing security clearances, it's kind of a thing that maybe should be looked into.
Yeah, and I think that there's other, like Paul Manafort's a good example of that, where it's not uncommon for people to act as represent interests of foreign parties, but when you have somebody doing it to the extent that Paul Manafort is doing it, and getting paid $10 million a year to represent Russian interests across the world, including in America, that is an extent that the sort of everybody does hasn't planned for.
It's also not uncommon to launder dirty money into building projects in major global cities across the world.
And actually, the building market especially, because there's a cutout within the Patriot Act where the government can't look at building transactions or real estate transactions through shell companies. So it's a special cutout that the real estate market has that nobody else has.
I didn't know that's not in the documentary. I didn't know that. Yeah. That's wild. Do you know who put that cutout in the Patriot Act? How that got there?
I don't. I mean, listen. There's a lot of
one of those great things. It's like we're gonna do everything we can to spy on people and make sure there's no. Oh no. We make a lot of money there. Let's get that out of there.
And there are counties in Florida where the #1 tax provider is laundered money.
So we wonder how all this Russian money got laundered in here, and it's actually very easy for them to do unless you become president through it, and people get upset.
Yeah, and also another important thing to realize is why they want to do this is that we have a rule of law country. So if you're a Russian oligarch in Russia, the Russian economy is not stable. The ruble is not stable. So you want your money in a jurisdiction where, and also Putin can't just take it away from you. So you want your money in a jurisdiction that's safe. But in order for the Russian government to allow you to do that, they have to do it through what are called one of their nodes, which are basically their points of contact for laundering, so they can keep track of where your money went and how it got there. So the Russian government still is aware of it. So that's where they use the mafia. And so there's this amazing interconnectivity between the Russian government and the Russian mafia on an operational level, specifically in the United States. And that money is used for influence as well.
And so essentially the money would go from a Russian oligarch to a point of contact within the mafia to a condominium in the United States?
It's more that the point of contact in the mafia would act as the broker. And they're not taking out any loans or mortgage for that money, so nobody else is seeing that money. There's no bank looking at that money. There's nobody looking at the money other than the broker. And so you want to do it through a safe organization. If you know of an organization where there's a very famous person running it who is known to be very wealthy and doesn't mind doing dirty deals, that would be the best one. And they would use that, and just specifically in Florida, in Toronto, in New York, Soho Trump was almost certainly a massive money laundering operation. And yeah, in Panama.
Now, when it comes to the documentary, I mean, so much of what people say in regards to the Trump campaign and collusion is that there's all this smoke, but we've yet to see fire yet. I personally think that's bullshit, and we've seen a lot of fire, and anytime Trump actually talks out loud about it, we see the fire. He can't help but incriminate himself. It's actually kind of hilarious. But with the film, I wonder if it was tough for you guys to sort of make the fire very clear, because even towards the end, we have someone say, with all this smoke, there has to be fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me,
Where's the fire for you?
For me, the fire is the overriding narrative. That when everything fits into place over a 30-year period, that in and of itself is. And I think that there's a sort of notion of proof that we don't. Proof is a personal threshold. So I think O.J. was proven guilty. A jury of his peers did not. That is a personal threshold we all have to decipher. I think that there is certainly enough evidence to suggest that there is no other reasonable explanation for what happened over that 30-year period.
Do you think proof is a personal threshold is equivalent to truth is relative?
No, I don't think so, because I mean, I am sitting on a stage. But as in the same way, like there's a reason you have a jury, and that is that proof is a personal threshold, and it's a reasonable doubt. It's not definitive proof. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, whose reasonable doubt? One's own. So there is that nature of a threshold has to be reached, and it's a personal threshold. I think evidence is evidence, but proof is certainly subjective. Otherwise, we wouldn't need juries. But truth is truth, and evidence is evidence. But proof is tough.
You know, one of the things that a lot of the detractors of this narrative and those that are pushing back against it say that that's all that it is. It is just a narrative that has been created in order to, again, sow division and to make it look like Donald Trump didn't actually win the election. What do you say to that? I mean, I think the film speaks to that.
I would love that. That'd be, yeah, if we're not in this, because honestly, I think what we're looking at is, and it's not just an American problem, this is a worldwide threat to democracy. If it all turned out to be just a wild series of coincidences lasting over the years involving multiple strains, like that would be wild, but that's the best possible scenario. I think it stretches credulity. I think for me, that is not a reasonable explanation. It doesn't, for me, that passes the burden of, it has passed the burden of proof that there is a connection and an interconnection there. And I think we show that in the film. But yeah.
I'm gonna ask a personal question here. How do you remain optimistic, knowing all the things that you know in regards to this and seeing the way that with the exception of the conviction of Paul Manafort and the recent plea on the part of Michael Cohen, it would seem like the gears are in motion, but all of the kind of fundamental institutions that should have been protecting us in the last 2 years and shouldn't really have allowed Gorsuch to get a seat, shouldn't allow Kavanaugh to get a seat, shouldn't allow a number of policies that the Trump administration put forward happen due to the fact that there is clear evidence it was a stolen election. How do you remain optimistic that our fundamental institutions in this country aren't just tainted, both prior to this and after?
I don't usually. I think that I have hope. I think that November things could. If the Dems take back the House in November, I think that Mueller, I think he'll do this anyway, will recommend indictment of Trump. And I think that it will be harder for Republicans to not vote for that than it will for Dems to vote for it.
But they might have Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court seat, and they might be able to fight whether or not a president can be indicted to the Supreme Court.
They can't. They're not going to fight if a president can be impeached. I'm assuming, for the sake of argument, I think that I think Kavanaugh's going to have a little bit more trouble than we think he's going to have right now, getting in.
I can hope so.
I think so. I think so. I think it's. We'll see, but I think it's.
Be cool, Ricky. Be cool. I'm like, okay, I'm trying.
He's
I'm
gonna
trying.
have trouble. But beyond that, I think that. Yeah, I have hope that November we can figure it out. But it is. Listen, getting rid of Trump does not solve this. This is a real issue you're going to have to deal with, and it's not just Citizens United. It's Buckley Vallejo, which is a '76 Supreme Court case that basically stated that that money is speech. I think that there could be a way. I think that it's possible that this is just like my own little thing, that if you were to tax political spending at like a 90% rate, you could address it in a real way because nobody questions the government's right to tax. But I think it's a very difficult issue, and I think getting rid of Trump is a very, very important part of it, but not the only thing you have to do.
What about the way in which we sow divisions amongst the American people and the fact that, or the idea that truth doesn't seem to exist anymore, fact doesn't exist? You can't publish an article with stated facts without a little less than half the country, maybe even a little less than that, saying, no, that's not what I believe, so that's not real.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a combination of a couple things that I think have to happen fundamentally for the country to kind of heal. I think that one of them is for us to all, this is kind of separate from the Russia stuff, but for us to all kind of look in our own backyards. Like, I think that one of the, for example, great divisions between the sort of left and the right is on race. But the most segregated school district in America is New York. Yeah. And so if we really want to deal with race, I think we should look at our own backyards where we really can have an effect, as opposed to looking at West Virginia and say we don't care about those rural people because they're racist. And I think that things like that.
It's also looking at class, too.
It's also looking at class in a huge way.
Extreme inequality in this country, which is also leading to these divisions and distrust amongst those that are. If you throw out the word elite, you can immediately create distrust. And if you are a person of low income means, the elite means a lot of things.
Well, yeah, and I think that that the sort of subdivisions, specifically on the left as well, really get in the way of that class argument. And I think that the more that there is a class argument in America, the more these things get easy to deal with, because you're not dealing with a 30-70, split. You're dealing with a 90-10. People who care about, poor people being able to pay for their food and have jobs, and that's a much more unified message. So yeah, I think that for us to start talking about class would also be a really important issue, because it is, I think, at the end of the day, that can be very unifying, and it's about a shared interest and shared experience.
You talk about subdivisions on the left. That reminds me, there's an image of Mike Flynn at a dinner with Putin, but also at that dinner is Jill Stein, right? And I believe wasn't at that dinner as well. I could be completely wrong on this, and I should have Googled it before I came on stage. Bernie's campaign manager at one point.
Tad? No.
Yeah, was he not at that?
No, but he worked for Manafort.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of questions about Tad Devine. Certainly, I don't have any of the answers to them, but I think that those are what was Tad Devine's relationship with Manafort during the campaign and before. I think are very important questions. But yeah, I think that there's certainly, and for me as a liberal, I actually spend more time worrying about the operation on the left. Yeah. I think that it's not nearly deeply penetrated on the left as it is on the right, but it's there, and they are targeting the left. And I think that the right was like a money sale, and the left is going to be an ideology sale more than anything. And that's what kind of concerns me, because the point is to also make any organization more extreme. So when they give money to the NRA, it's to make it a more extreme organization so that it is disconnected from American mainstream, so that it's America fighting against itself. And I worry that they're going to co-opt things I feel very deeply about and think are very true, and complaints that I think are very legitimate, and turn them in a way that are counterproductive to those issues. And so that's my big concern for Russia operations on the left. And you see it. There's a long history of it too.
Don't you think that is able to work, though, because the sort of middle of the road of both of the parties has in many ways been such a failure for some time in this country? For a lot of people, it's been a failure. I mean, you think back to the after the financial disaster in 2008, George Packer was just writing about this in the New Yorker, how the stimulus package that Obama put together essentially just saved the banks and didn't really provide any new job creation. And even though it was a minor stimulus package that economists on both sides of the aisle were for, and actually for a greater package, the Republican Party wouldn't vote for it because they wanted to obstruct him, and therefore he tried to form a bipartisanship with them, but they wouldn't do it anyway, so the bill got watered down. The same thing goes for the ACA. So you have a kind of failure on both sides of the establishment, and so therefore that also creates a certain kind of extremism on both sides as well.
Sure. I mean, there are always going to be openings. There's always going to be failure, and there's always going to be openings, because every system has those, and I think that's and for example, that's a good thing. I mean, for example, I think it's a very accurate criticism. I think that's completely fair. I think it's completely true. The thing that concerns me is then taking that criticism and addressing it in a way that is not only going to not make the problem better, but is going to make the people that are talking about it hate each other. Because I think that I agree.
You're talking about Twitter.
I'm talking about Twitter. Yeah, I'm talking about Twitter. I'm talking about media in general. I'm talking about Facebook's, the worst on that. But yeah, and I think that it's easy to sort of be like, oh well, it doesn't really have an effect, but I think it really does. I think that the accumulation over time, and it's not necessarily that like a person thinks that because Russia tells them this, that they think, oh well, that's the case. That Obama had a 200,000-pound bronze bust of himself in his office. They're not going to be like, oh well, I read that, therefore I think it's the case. But it becomes an option. It changes sort of the plane of possibilities in one's mind, and that's what they're trying to do.
I remember during the election talking to people who would talk about the Clinton Foundation and say things, and these were people who were on the left who would talk about the Clinton. And look, I voted for Hillary, but I support a lot of what Bernie stands for. But at the same time, I would talk to Bernie Sanders supporters who would say things about the Clinton Foundation, like that's just patently not true. Yeah. Where did you see that? And they didn't want to say Facebook, so they would kind of like, whoa, I saw it online, and you have to be like, no, look, here's an article that disproves all of this stuff. This is the Washington Post, not the thing that you saw on Facebook from like liberal.net.eu or something, Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and that's the thing is like also there are very fair criticisms of the Clintons.
Yes.
And they are absolutely there. And the problem is then when it's like, well, no, actually the Clinton Foundation has done better things certainly for AIDS in Africa than I will ever do, and has done amazing things around the world. It is frustrating as someone who's like, well, yeah, that there's reasonable things you can criticize them for, but not that one. Like that's pick something. Yes, the speeches, sure.
There's no need to do that.
Yeah.
Guess what Obama's doing it now too.
Yeah.
$500,000 speeches to financial institutions, right?
Didn't bother Rudy after 9/11.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Who's a question?
Hi. So this film seems to be really politically charged and relevant, so I was just wondering what fears and trepidations you faced before and during shooting.
Sure. I mean, we got some pushback, certainly. We got some threatening phone calls. We get followed here and there.
Followed?
Yeah, through Union Station. I got followed once. I could have been a Fed for all I know, but I don't think so. And, we would get like phishing attempts. It kind of ended once the Mueller investigation started. I think we dropped significantly in their sort of priorities list. But yeah, now there's RT articles and Sputnik articles about the film that are not particularly nice. And our IMDb gets pilfered with negative ratings and stuff like that, even though the film's not out yet. So there's stuff, but it's you kind of like, when we got into this, we got several pep talks of like, all right, well, keep your stuff on like 7 different drives, and you might get broken into, you're gonna get followed, stuff like that. So we were pretty prepared for it, but it wasn't anything like we never got attacked or anything.
How did you know you were getting followed?
So that one, I just walked into the day before. Someone been like, "Have you been followed yet?" And we're like, "No." He's like, "All right, well, that's gonna start." So I was.
Who said that to you?
It was a journalist. I don't want to say who, but it was the beginning of this, and he was following this issue, and he's in D.C. And I was walking to Union Station, and the guy walked right in front of me, and I was like, that's weird. All right, well, let's see if he stops and like looks around like because in Union Station there is no like board with all the things. If you walk to the middle, you're just looking at nothing. And he walks to the middle and just stops there. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go where I'm not going. I'm a little late to this train, so I gotta hurry up and figure this out. But let me go to the buses section and see if he follows me, because this guy seems like he's following me. Walk to the buses section, he's behind me. I turn to the train section, I walk to the train section. During the train section, he's behind me. I then go down this little corridor that looks like it's a gate, but it's not. It's just, there's just nothing there. It's like there's like a little kiosk next to it, and maybe it used to be a gate or something. And I walk down there, and I just stand at the end, and I turn around, and he comes around the corner, and I go, hello? And he's, and kind of walks off about 30 yards, and I was near my gate. And he just looks at me as I'm getting on my gate, and then I was gone, so I didn't see if he left. I assume he did.
How much of that do you think is someone trying to collect information on you, or someone trying to make sure that you notice that you're being followed, so that there's a little bit of intimidation there?
Could have just been a guy who liked following people, for all I know. I have no idea.
He's just like, you look like a guy that'd be fun to follow. I'll follow you.
Could be. For all I know, as far as information I have, that is a possibility. It seems less likely than other possibilities, but it is one.
Now, I have to ask, with with Cohen pleading and Manafort being found guilty, he hasn't copped a plea yet. It doesn't seem like he will. Seems like he's waiting for a pardon, or he's worried about some sort of retaliation attempt while he's in prison. Does it seem like all of the pieces are coming together, and that impeachment something like that may happen, or we may get to the bottom of this? I mean, in the sense that your film gets to the bottom, but get to the bottom of this in the way that the Mueller investigation will bring it to light.
I think so. Yeah, I think that it's going to happen. I think that Michael Cohen was kind of the key to that. Michael Cohen has, I mean, basically, I think that the real key is that this all goes back to the Russian mafia, and that the Russian mafia works very hand in hand with the Russian government. And before he was working with the Russian government, with oligarchs, he was working with the Russian mob in New York. And Cohen knew Felix Sater, who was Trump's Russian mob handler, knew him before he knew Donald Trump. He was friends with that guy since they were teenagers. They would hang out in Brighton Beach. Cohen's background certainly intersects with the Russian mob for a long time before it intersects with Donald Trump. And so I think that a lot of this Cohen stuff, especially through the Southern District here, is going to be very heavy and go back a very long time for Russian mob. And I think that's going to be the big kind of connection that's going to make all these pieces make sense.
Now, I have this humongous pet peeve on social media when I see people post, you know, there's a news story about Cohen pleading or someone getting indicted, and someone will post, ha, 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 Trump, soon it will be you, or soon it will be you, Don Jr., and I always want to say, you don't know that. Like, these are the two most protected people within this criminal enterprise. For them to actually be indicted and go to prison, a sitting president to go to prison is unheard of. Like, to put your eggs in that basket is a total fantasy, in my opinion. Like, it shouldn't even roll off the tip of your tongue.
Sure. Well, I think Don Jr. is in a mess of trouble, though. I think you can make that case for the president because he's the president. And I think that there's probably he probably worked in a lot of plausible deniability as he was going. But I think Don Jr. now, as of yesterday, as of the last few days, has a lot of trouble with New York state charges because Donald can't do anything about that. He can't pardon state charges.
Is he in the Cohen plea?
He is
Executive 1, Executive 2?
No, he is. He's in the New York state charges, which are being filed against the Trump Foundation, and the kids have had a lot to do with the foundation. I think Eric Trump's foundation is going to get wrapped up into that, and I think that there was probably no. I mean, the filing documents are devastating. I mean, there's millions of dollars went from a charity foundation into the campaign. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were used to pay off fines, personal fines for the Trumps, which is just flatly and wildly illegal.
There's a part of me that believes, like, if Donald Trump had just taken office and been a calm, like, fine, right Republican, which would have driven me crazy no matter what, but like a Republican, fine president who wasn't a shitbag every morning when he woke up and picked up his phone, like, very little of this may have happened. Like, if he hadn't have fired Comey.
Yeah, I mean, we did it's funny, there's sort of these two scenarios in my head with the film. One is right now where all this news is breaking, it's coming out, it's great, but we did our first interview the day after he fired Comey. So we were in the middle of this before that even happened. So there certainly is a scenario in my head of like, well, what if he doesn't do that? And what if a lot of the stuff just didn't come out and people are like, Russia, that was the thing from 2016 people were talking about?
Do you know how much stuff there is like this in the Bush administration? But because Bush could go up to a microphone and be like, hey, everybody, I'm the president and I'm going to do the best that I can. And then he wouldn't pull out his phone and, like, you know, call someone a scumbag on Twitter or do something horrible. People were like, whatever.
I do think that there is more there in a sloppy way, though. Yeah. I mean, I think that with Bush, you could very easily say he's, irresponsible or not appropriate relationship with the Saudis. I think you could say that, the farm bill was a joke and giveaway, and that the corn lobby owned that administration. But I don't think that there's the decades of like overt criminality. You could, listen, one could make the case that in some ways some of the things Bushes were doing, you could like less. You could think, but it wasn't overtly criminal in the same. Like, Manafort was breaking the law widely reported for over a decade. And so all these guys. I think Trump would not have come back from, basically one of the things we track is that in the 90s, Trump starts going into debt. He starts getting bankruptcies. He can't get a loan. 2004, he gets his sort of final bankruptcy. He's in a lot of trouble, and the Russian mob makes a move on him. And this guy, Semyon Mogilevich, who's the head of the Russian mafia, Basically, he's the sort of money laundering genius. He's an economics degree. He's known as the Brainy Don. He's got $10 billion. He lives in Russia openly. His current lawyer is the former head of the FBI, William Sessions. This is a really powerful guy. And they made the move on Trump in 2004. And what they did was they started providing seed capital into so when he's licensing it out, they would provide the seed capital for it. And that would allow him to actually get buildings made. And without that, it doesn't happen.
Now, at this time in 2004, he has The Apprentice, the show.
This is right before.
This is right before.
So this is between 2002, 2004 is when Russian mob members start moving into Trump Tower, running offices. Bayrock Group sets up, which is a Russian, basically, real estate firm, founded almost certainly to just launder money into the Trump organization. They start doing it. And it's a couple of years before The Apprentice. I think The Apprentice helps in that it raises his profile, but it doesn't help him with the banks. Like it's not like he's making a few $1 million a year. He's not getting enough that people are going to give him $400 million for a building. And so that's where the Russians really came in. And without that, he doesn't get back on top in terms of, or he doesn't make money as a real estate developer.
Can I ask you a kind of a pain in the ass, devil's advocate, what about question? When we talk about Russia and we talk about the oligarchs and we talk about financial institutions, yes, there is direct evidence, but oftentimes we are connecting things that I think the Russians or others could use in the United States when talking about American oligarchs, because there are definitely American oligarchs who have had positions in government or close ties to positions in government. I think of someone like Jamie Dimon or Tim Geithner, people who actually work for massive financial institutions in this country who did have positions in government or close connections, who worked with administrations during the collapse, before it or after it, and shaped financial policy in this country. There is an argument to be made that there are American oligarchs with very close ties to government in this country in the same way that it exists in Russia. There is a centralized economic power in this country. How would you dispute that? Well, I mean, I know I'm kind of wrong.
No. But I think it's a good, important point and an often made point. I would say that one is it is an issue of degrees. So, for example, we have a very, very serious wealth inequality problem in America. Absolutely. Whereas in Russia, 100 people own 40% of the entire GDP. That is despite it being one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, it has a median income the same as India. And that's because they have just stolen everything out of that country. And so I think that to an extent it is degrees. It's like, does this, I don't know that there's quite the equivalent. The second part of it I would say is that I agree that American oligarchs, if we're using that term, I'm happy to, is a real problem. But at least they have to live here. Like I don't like the Koch brothers, but they're living in Wichita. They have a whole community that is there. And so I think their intention is not to disrupt the political process and to undermine it. I don't think, listen, I think that if you put David Koch or Bill Koch on a lie detector, he would believe absolutely that what he was doing was right for America. I think he's wrong. I think he's very wrong. I think he has enough information to know that he's wrong. But there is an element of he is not trying to absolutely hurt the economy. He's not trying to get the GDP to come down. He's not trying to get, communities fighting.
Well, they often believe that more money in the hands of more people could drive the GDP down in some way because there isn't a centralized force managing economic policy. I think one of the big disputes between sort of the right-wing oligarchs and maybe if you want to call them the more democratic oligarchs, if they are that, is that it's just a change of power. It's a change of how we handle our finances in this country. Both are in some ways doing similar things, I think, policy-wise. My big fear with the Republican-controlled government right now in regards to the tax cuts is that that is a means with which to create another kind of oligarchy that is consistently centralizing power into Republican hands and funneling money back into that party, which we're already kind of seeing in that New York Times article last week. The tax cut is essentially just a way to get more money from the right-wing donors, which in a lot of ways maintains the power.
No, I'm at no way am I not saying I don't think it's a serious problem. I think it's absolutely a serious problem. I just think it's a different kind of problem. It's not unrelated. I just.
I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
But I'm saying I think with the tax cuts and with the Republican Party and the way that they handle their donor base, that it seems like they're trying to push more towards something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a concern. My more concern tends. Obviously I've been focused on Russia, but my concern as well is that if we don't deal with it, in addition to them, if every major country thinks it's open season on American elections, China's going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Iran's going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. India's going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're going to outspend the Koch brothers. They're going to outspend the interests that we used to think were the big baddies. And all of a sudden, those guys are going to seem very reasonable. And so I think that we have to address all of it at once. I don't think you can address the foreign influence without addressing the local influence, which is both the good news and the bad news in a weird way. But yeah, I think both have to be addressed, absolutely. Otherwise, this is going to look less and less like a democracy every election season.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your project and your work. My question is about, do you have any advice for either young filmmakers, documentarians, reporters, journalists who are trying to get into the industry or like tell these stories in this era right now, in this political time?
Yeah, you're needed. You know, I mean, this is an era where you can pick one of 10 different stories and do incredible, or one of 50 different stories and be doing incredibly important work. You know, it's a time when journalism is in a massive upheaval. And if you can be a journalist, whether professional or citizen, be responsible to the truth, and present a point of view that is, even if it's not unique, if you can be responsible to the truth, I think that there's a need for everybody to do this. And there's not everybody, but I think there's a need for people to be doing this. So I think the problem is that there is not as much money in journalism as there once was, but there's a much bigger need for it, I think. And so I can't give advice on the money side of it because it's just there's none good ones to have. But I would say build your own network as well. Like build your own, have the people that listen to you and know what you, and believe you, and be real with them. You know, don't hide. The truth will always be more interesting than what you can come up with. So if you're following that, you're on the right track.
Last question for you before I let you go. After having made this documentary, you've finished it, you've screened it, you believe so much in this project, and you know so much about this. What did it feel like to see that photograph going around a few weeks ago of two old men at a Trump rally wearing a shirts that said, "I'd rather be Russian than a Democrat"?
Well, I mean, listen, it's kind of why we made it, you know what I mean? Because they don't. They might think that, but they wouldn't. And so, you know, it's frightening what I'm seeing. I think that in some ways, working on this film it has been more frightening because I think the implications of what's happening are greater than a lot of people realize.
And you're getting followed.
Yeah, but honestly, compared to seeing what's happening to the country, getting followed was the least scary thing that happened. And what's happening to Europe as well. I mean, it's all related. And so, you know, when we made this film, and now that it's coming out, it's available for pre-order on iTunes, everybody. Comes out August 31st. It feels like a relief. I feel like we're kind of hopefully getting the word out there. But yeah, it's been a terrifying year and a half.
Jack, the film is fantastic. As you said, August 31st, it's coming out. People can pre-order it now on iTunes. The movie is called Active Measures. Please give a big round of applause for Jack Bryan. Let's hear it.